Yeah, it's fun stuff. And the horses, there's just something about horses, they love it.
So hopefully we'll be learning two things now.
I don't know if you did notice, we kind of get alive.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, but we won't start really the presentation, or it's gonna be interview format. We won't start it right now. We'll have some kind of intelligent. Don't mute your microphones yet. Intelligent conversation. So I can see. Okay, we'll get more viewers. Well, hopefully we'll be getting more viewers every single minute. So okay, you keep. Reese, can we keep a reasonable conversation for 5-7 minutes? Okay, I'll start with presenting. We have Joe Dolson. Joe Dolson from the United States. He's specialist in usability. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm really more of a specialist in accessibility.
Can we hold on for a second? I'm sorry. I just got a message from Joe Hall who says he's blocked from getting in.
Oh.
What does it mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? He's trying to get in and messaged me. He was supposed to be joining us, and he says, it won't let me join, says I blocked someone on the call.
I didn't block anybody, and it's all the same link I sent to all of you, so I don't really know.
I guess he needs to have an authorization.
He's here.
He's here now.
There we go.
Yay!
Okay, guys. Okay, I have to do some technical things. Just to, so people would know that transmission's already started. Because some people they need to reload a web page to see it. Okay.
But we did get Joe Hall.
Hey guys.
Yay!
Hey Joe.
Hey Joe.
What was that delay of people actually getting set up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried so hard to prepare, and it was always that last-minute thing, that was going to just mess me up. Did you know that there's over 1 billion people in the world with disabilities? I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It's a pretty incredible number. I mean, a lot of those disabilities don't really impact the web in any significant way.
I know one of the guys who has physical disability, and he's a genius. He's presently working in Pakistan with one of the billionaire companies that is working for US, and he has a creative mind. He's great with each and every ideas that he has. And he's physically disabled. He had that since he was born. He had a polio and things. He could not move on and all those things. He still have a wheelchair and things, but he's great.
Yeah, technically I fall into the accessibility disability realm because if I don't have my contacts or glasses or reading glasses on right now, I'm technically blind, and I'm deteriorating the older I get. So one of my interests has always been the visual, because I figure someday I'm going to need more help than I already have to be able to read.
Kim, you should say you're not old enough. You should say I'm getting younger. Not old.
Yeah. I'll reverse it. But when I talk to people about accessibility, it's definitely more than just the visual and the deaf, and I think that is one of the problems that we face is what exactly accessibility is and why it's important. And
well, I think it's a crucial thing to recognize that on the web, disability is significantly an illusion. I mean, there are absolutely disabilities that are inherently going to be a challenge in any communication sphere. But on the web, most of what creates a disability are barriers that we as web developers put in place. And what we have to do is try and not do that, because we just make life harder for people. And there's no reason that life should be harder.
An example is Mark Zuckerberg for Facebook. He's colorblind. So that is why Facebook's main color is blue, because Mark Zuckerberg can see that color.
See, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have people coming to you and asking you to do a design review, you're going to want to be able to know that you're actually seeing what they've designed.
Right. I've worked with
Yeah.
UI engineers who are colorblind, and it's interesting because they don't see all the colors for what they are making. And so they rely on other people to give them feedback.
But I tell you something, there are because I know somebody in Pakistan who is colorblind. He's working for one of the famous telecom company advertising agency, and if you just go into his office, you can see numerous colors. Then my always question is, why do you have such colors? He said, even if we are colorblind, we have a sense of light gray, light black, or darker black. Means they have still the shades with them. So they use different colors, like uh, dark yellow is coming up something very different to them as compared to it's come to us as a yellow. For them, dark green comes out something very different. For us, it comes out dark green. So even these people, they do have disabilities, but they have something upper hand on what they can see.
It's the interesting thing about color blindness is that in no way is it the inability to see a color. It's actually the inability to distinguish between certain colors. But doesn't mean that they aren't different. It's just that you can't tell that whether it's red or green. It's all kind of the same color.
Right.
But you can still distinguish easily between different shades of green. You know, dark green versus light green are clearly different. So you can do a lot of design without any dependency on color. Color is really not crucial to that scenario. And some great designers are colorblind.
Okay, guys, I think we waited enough. We waited enough for everyone who's late. Who's going to be late, they will join us. They will lose some part of it. So we do have today, and I usually do it from left to right on my screen. My screen is slightly different from everybody's screen because I'm the boss here. Okay, just a joke. Okay, so Joe Dolson on the left, on my left, the left is left. Joe Dolson, and we have Joe Hall today as well. I can't really see.
There he is.
Yeah, here it is. Okay, great. And we have Kim Krause Berg today. As well. Okay, so Joe Dolson and Kim Krause Berg are speakers. Joe Hall is a guest of honor, and the next guest of honor is Musa Hemani on my screen. Musa Hemani, SEO from Pakistan. According to Alan Blightwise, he is the most brilliant mind in SEO. It's Alan Blightwise's opinion. It's not mine, but I will join. I will sign for it as well. And the last one on my screen, but not the least, is Rizwan Bala. He is also from Pakistan, and he's content maker and a blogger. And he is quite regular here, and he's famous for asking unusual but intelligent questions.
So be prepared, huh?
Yeah, be prepared.
Thank God he's not saying that he's famous for asking questions in an unethical way. So that's better.
Okay, guys, everybody who is watching us, okay, we have Joe Dolson and we have Kim Krause Berg, and guys, it's all yours.
All right.
Well, as Joe knows, I wanted to give a brief introduction into some of the amazing things that he does. For everybody here and who will be watching the video, go to his website, joedolson.com. He does accessibility for the web. He's been doing this work for as long as I've known him, which is at least 10, 12, 15 years, something like that, one time. And he is, I consider him my mentor, and he's the one who got me enthusiastic about accessibility. He volunteers for the WordPress organization. Is that how you would? Okay. And they help develop more accessible themes and the software itself, the software application, making it accessible. He also has several tools, one of which is his color contrast tool, which I use in every single one of my site audits for usability. He also has a WordPress tool, which maybe you might want to explain that one a little bit. and how that works with WordPress. But anyway, he's a developer. He uses this stuff. He works with this stuff, and he is also starting to. He rose again with talking about the ARIA, or ARIA, however you pronounce it, which, you know, a lot of people aren't familiar with the term, which is why I wanted to interview him. So, everybody, this is Joe Dolson.
Thanks a lot, Kim. I'm really glad to be here. And it's funny that you say that you consider me kind of a mentor, because I have to be honest, I kind of consider you a bit of a mentor. I mean, I got my start on the web by really participating heavily in Create-A-Site forums, which Kim founded, and was a gracious and welcoming host in that environment for a long time.
It still exists. It's just done.
It does still exist. I don't happen to get there very often anymore, but it was a great place to really be able to dive in to the world of SEO and usability and web development, and have great experiences while I was getting my feet wet 12 years ago.
Yeah.
It feels ancient now, but you know, that's the way things go. You mentioned my WordPress plugins about accessibility, so I will talk about those briefly. I have two of them. There's one that's called WP Accessibility, and it's a tool that you can install into any WordPress site, and it will correct a number of existing deficiencies in your WordPress theme. And you have to be able to read the information about it and be able to figure out exactly which options you should turn on, because practically speaking, I have no way of knowing from the start what problems you have, but I do know what problems I can automatically look for, and so it can do things like find your search form and automatically add a label, because that's a known characteristic, and I can just do that. So that's one of my tools, and the other one is something called Access Monitor, which works along with the Tenon.io web accessibility API. And that requires an account with Tenon.io, but you can use it to run automated tests on your site, on pages on your site, or on the admin, to check and see whether these pages are accessible and whether they're staying accessible. And included in that, you can actually run tests that happen before you publish your article, and will say, hey, this doesn't pass the tests you've said you need to pass, so no, you can't publish that.
Is there a link to that from your website?
Oh yeah. There's a link to everything.
Okay.
It'll be under the section for WordPress plugins. So.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that one. Yay.
So it's a great tool. So I'm here though to talk about ARIA, and neither of those tools do a huge amount with ARIA, because ARIA is a really interesting and complex system. And it's hard to say exactly what you should call it. I consider it a meta-language. What it is it's a set of specialized attributes that you can insert into HTML, and that will then help HTML communicate more effectively with accessibility APIs. Now, it might help to know a little bit about how the accessibility stack works in the browser. At the core, you start with the HTML. The HTML is then rendered by the browser into the document object model. I've got a timeout from somebody.
Yeah. Joe, is it possible, can you, my apologies, I'm just cutting you in between. Is it possible for you to share your screen with all those things? Because if you're going like this, like I've opened it here on my computer, right? I'm working along with the conversation. So if you can show us that, how your plugins are and what they do, that would help a lot more rather than we go for just for conversation. It's my point of view. That's what I'm talking about. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I can. You mean my WordPress plugins? You want a demo of those at some point?
Yes.
I'll do that later, but I want to talk about ARIA at the moment, which my plugins really don't have much to do with ARIA.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay. Got that.
There's kind of a side topic.
We'll have to interview him again.
Yeah, that's fine. Hey, I can talk about lots of stuff. But ARIA, it's very difficult to provide a visual about the accessibility stack. Think of it similarly to what you would think of as for a developer stack, like the traditional LAMP stack of Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That's a way of generating code and operating a website. Well, the accessibility stack is similar, but it's a stack from the HTML through the DOM, through the browser, into what's called the accessibility API that interacts with the operating system. And what that accessibility API does is it looks at the DOM and it identifies what the text of that page is and what it can share to something like a screen reader. Now, HTML is a somewhat limited language. It has a finite set of elements and a finite number of ways of creating labels and relationships. So what ARIA does is it makes that considerably more elaborate, and it's a much richer experience. What ARIA stands for is Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and it's really designed to make things like single-page JavaScript apps or basic interactions like a simple Ajax query accessible to people with disabilities. Now, the reason something like that might not be accessible is because the accessibility API is reading from the DOM, and it takes this snapshot of the DOM, which is what the screen reader actually uses. And that means when you say make an Ajax query, you fill in your form fields, you hit submit. As a sighted user, you clearly see this thing pop up right on your screen that says, thank you for your submission, it's been successful. And that's a change to the DOM that the screen reader doesn't know anything about. So the screen reader, without ARIA, is silent. Obviously, that's going to be a problem if you want to really know what's going on.
Right.
But ARIA provides, for example, an attribute called ARIA Live. If you add this attribute to, say, a div, a container on the page, then the screen reader knows to monitor that part of the DOM for any changes. And if a change happens, it can say, aha, there's been a change, I should announce that. So this is one of the ways in which ARIA enables a browser to have a much better idea of what's going to happen and what the state of a page currently is. Now, obviously, screen readers could use a DOM in such a manner that they're just constantly monitoring for any change. In theory, that would be possible. But that doesn't solve the problem of multiple updating areas. Because if lots of different changes are happening, you need to have some way of saying which one you want to be looking at or which one is significant. So you can make these relationships much cleaner by saying that this is an area that we want to have updated for a screen reader, but maybe this other area is actually purely visual information. We don't need to do that. And so ARIA Live allows you to say this area is now going to be monitored and checked for updates. And this is an absolutely critical accessibility feature if you're going to use any kind of JavaScript-driven dynamic feedback. I mean, if you look at something as basic as a comment form on a website, and I've absolutely done examples of this, the standard WordPress comment form. You submit a comment, and you get no feedback. How does that make you feel? Do you know what's happened? Do you have any idea what you should do next? Should you just submit your comment again? Well, great, now you get no feedback again. You're left with the feeling that this site is just broken, that nothing is happening. Now let's say you take away all the JavaScript, and let's say that this is a standard WordPress comment form, and it's going to behave exactly as it would without that JavaScript. Now you're going to get feedback. You're going to submit that form, and it's going to send you to, let's say you make a mistake. It's going to send you to an error page and say, I'm sorry, we need more information. So now you've got feedback, but you've also got a really awkward user interface because you're being sent off to a new page. You've got to find your way back because you have to find the back button. Then you're on this old page again. You have to find the form again because you're not there anymore. It's important to recognize that a screen reader can only look at the web page in linear order. So it always has to start at the top and then move its way down until it finds where you actually were, and that's tedious. So that experience is painful but accessible. So if you add Ajax and you also add ARIA, what you actually get is an experience that's great for everybody. If you add Ajax and you don't add ARIA, you have one that's great for people who can see what's going on, and absolutely, completely broken if you can't. So that association between ARIA and JavaScript has to be really tight and really important. Any questions on that? You look like you had one, Kim.
Yeah, I was thinking of like a travel, like reservations, you know, accessibility or applications. You know, things that people use on the go, and not even considering mobile. But and you know, one of the reasons why I wanted Joe Hall here is because I have traveled with him, and I can't even imagine what it's like. You know, even just as far as his, you know, not that he can't see, but you know, is there a way to make things easier for Joe using ARIA? I mean, is there anything that Joe runs into in his travels, which I don't know. I could be just shooting out in the middle of nowhere on this.
It's an interestingly challenging question. In theory, yes. In practice, no. Right now, I mean, the support for ARIA is extremely screen reader focused, but there are some theoretical models of ways that it could interact with, you know, say, the Internet of Things to provide you know, audio feedback of directionality to make sure you're going the right way without having to actually hold something in your hands and look at it. You know, it's fuzzy. It's not.
Well, that's one of the. This is Joe Hall. That's one of the questions. That's one of the questions I had actually. Was what is the scope of ARIA outside of accessibility? And I guess that might be a weird question. But the point I'm trying to get at is, from what I can tell from ARIA, it seems to be very close to, you know, in SEO, what we call schema or rich text markup, that kind of thing.
Right.
And with SEO, when I'm selling SEO services, I'm telling people that, okay, this rich text format is great for SEO, but it's also great for all these other things as well.
Right.
So, and I actually mentioned accessibility quite a bit as part of my pitch, you know, to changing their markup.
Right.
I'm wondering, is there a way, because I'll tell you, when I'm trying to pitch accessibility to a client, it's like pulling teeth sometimes.
I totally understand that.
What we need to do as professionals, though, is try to draw a connection between that investment they're making on their markup to their bottom line. And I'm wondering, you know, we can sit here and say, oh, well, this percentage of your audience is, you know, may have visual impairments, that kind of thing. Is there any other thing that we can say, you know, ARIA can also be used outside of this accessibility context? You know, maybe just for a greater expansion of rich text, you know. I don't know.
Right. Well, here's what I can say to that. One of the things ARIA does is it establishes relationships between elements.
Yeah.
And I can talk about that further. And that is something that, at least in theory, search engines could use to better parse the relationships between these items, because it's made very explicit. You know, you have attributes such as ARIA owns and ARIA controls that really say explicitly, this item controls that item. They are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
I'm not aware that Google is actually doing anything like that, but it's certainly something they theoretically could and probably will over time.
Yeah.
The second thing I'd say is one of the things about a lot of ARIA practices is that there's a large part of it which is basically just taking a better semantic path to doing your normal development. Let's just take for an example, let's look at a button you're using to toggle a responsive menu. Now, I've seen a lot of those, and a common structure which I loathe is a div with a class that says, you know, class equals toggle, and then a label. And people will just attach an on-click action using JavaScript, and it'll open and close a menu. Pretty simple, pretty basic, but also horribly inaccessible. If you were using it with ARIA, what you'd actually want to do, I mean, first of all, you'd want to use a button, because if you're using a div to attach any kind of action, that is inherently inaccessible. But but the button can have things like an ARIA expanded value. So ARIA expanded equals true would mean that whatever this button is controlling is currently expanded. And that will, A, announce to screen readers whether or not they need to press this button. They can see it's a menu toggle button, and now they know that it's expanded, and if they continue on, they'll just get to the menu, which is a really important piece of information. But you can also use that in your CSS to define what the button looks like in each state, and you can use it in your JavaScript to define what that button does when you click on it. So you don't need to have classes indicating whether it's active, that it's a toggle, what it does. You just have ARIA owns and the container that it expands, and you have ARIA expanded that indicates whether or not it's currently expanded.
So if you use, I'm sorry, if you use it in that way, are all of the browsers currently supporting ARIA as a CSS selector?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
I'd have to look to absolutely verify. I mean, I don't remember that sort of thing for things like IE8 and whatnot.
Yeah. But that's cool. That's pretty cool.
But that's actually a really easy thing to shim in to make sure that you're just providing that support.
Yeah.
But yeah, so using those as CSS and jQuery selectors is actually a really great way to just simplify the way you use that code. Because one of the criticisms of ARIA has been that it's like, well, great, now I've got these like 4 additional attributes I need to add to my button. That seems ridiculous. But sometimes those are just substitutions, because you really don't need some of those old attributes that you would have been using anyway. So yeah, I cannot honestly say that there's a way you can sell this to your clients and say, ARIA is totally going to be a great thing for your bottom line. I can say that there are an awful lot of people with disabilities, and if you look at the fact that one of the largest markets of people who have accessibility needs is people over 55 who have failing vision, as Kim mentioned earlier today. There's a lot of economic power in that market.
Yeah.
I mean, that's grandparents buying things for their, teenagers. It's an enormous group of people. And that really is something that shouldn't be ignored, because it's not much of a step from I can barely see this page to I can't see this page. That's a line that can be crossed very quickly.
Hold on. I just posted a link. I don't know if everybody can see it, but Anton knows that I created a PDF for download, and it has links not only to Joe's tools, but also to some resources. Okay, somebody said they can see it, to what we're talking about, because there's so much resources on ARIA, ways to get the stuff that Joe is talking about, and I figured it's going to blow your mind, so I compiled some stuff. So just grab the PDF and follow the links, and that ought to be helpful to some folks.
I just got one question, Joe.
Yes.
Because we recently moved on from the PHP language, because there is a requirement for one of the clients. He wants something to be on Node.js, okay? And for that, his user interface is usually changing on every next window that's being opened. Okay? So how ARIA is going to help in that form? Because his UI is changing. First, if it's for the home page, it's something different. For others' reservations, something different. For travel history or something that's different. So you're saying it's a live stuff. If you take, for example, any of the companies that is updating their website on every second basis, not minute basis, I'm talking about every second basis.
Mm-hmm.
So how ARIA is going to put or help that website on a better way, because they probably not be using the WordPress or the CSS that strong as compared to the Node.js.
I don't really think that that should be any kind of a barrier. I mean, ARIA is about defining roles and relationships between elements. So as long as they're using HTML elements, which they pretty much have to be at some level, I mean, even if they're using a framework such as React.js, where you don't really describe your elements in any significant way, they still ultimately get rendered as an HTML element, and they can be related to other elements. So it's applicable to any interface that's being operated via a web browser or emulator thereof. I mean, even if it's a web app that's being generated from HTML5, ARIA is still applicable. Although that gets into fuzzier cases because you're starting to look at the, Android and iOS accessibility APIs and interacting with those. But it's still valuable. So I don't think that updating the site and the user interface on a second-by-second basis should have any impact, as long as you're still creating relationships.
Let me ask a question that's sort of on the same lines of that. You mentioned Ajax earlier,
Yes.
and you mentioned it in the context of a button or a menu kind of thing. Is it possible to use ARIA with Ajax without user interaction? What, his example.
You mean like a ticker, like a news ticker type thing?
Yeah, like a news ticker or a page that updates on its own without any type of user behavior. Does ARIA, can you build it in like that so that it's always kind of paying attention to that one div or whatever?
You can. There are some major caveats about that. You have to think about it in terms of what an oral experience of a website is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
As a visual user, you're very focused. You can direct your gaze at a specific point on the page, and you exclude everything else around you. You're just looking at that. But as an oral interface, you're being bombarded with everything that's happening simultaneously, if there's more than one thing. So if you've got something like an ARIA Live region that's updating automatically constantly, then what you've got is, you're trying to read along, say, this article, and every 2 seconds you're being notified, this stock price has just jumped to 0.23.
Yeah.
And that would be absolutely maddening. A general rule of thumb in accessibility is that nothing should happen without user direction.
Okay.
And in that kind of case, there is a value to something like an ongoing ticker, but what you just really need to make sure that you have available for that is a pause button.
Okay.
And that should be something that's really easily gotten to. And I mean, obviously, one of the things about that is if you're doing this live update, the first time you do the live update, you could automatically move focus to the element, so that they get the update, focus is moved, and immediately they go to a pause button. So if they don't want to hear this, they can pause it right away.
Okay.
And because
that'd be great for sliders.
Absolutely. Every slider should have a pause button.
Yes, I know. I harp on that all the time.
So, I mean, and that's one of the things that's really important to keep in mind with screen readers. Yeah?
Why ARIA? Why ARIA? What for? Because what I can see right now, if we bring ARIA right now in our websites, this means we have to do each and every work from the scratch. In case if we are working on such as sliders and updating the websites or websites like Alibaba or online stores, this is going to be crazy then. Why ARIA then?
I mean, I am not sure I understand your question entirely. I mean, ARIA is there so that these relationships are exposed to people with disabilities, and that's the why, period. It's because everybody who's accessing your website has an equal right to use your website. They should be able to come there and have an equal experience, regardless of having some kind of arbitrary disability. So that's why. I'm not sure, it shouldn't be as complex as you're imagining. I mean, most of this work should go into templates. Almost none of it is stuff that you'd actually put into written content. I mean, a paragraph of text doesn't need anything extra. It's just a paragraph of text. It's
well,
fine.
let me ask you this. Same line of questioning. Why ARIA if you could potentially make the site accessible without ARIA?
And actually, that's an extremely good question. You should actually always avoid ARIA unless you need it.
Very good.
And that's one of the challenging things. You actually, you don't want to use a lot of ARIA. ARIA should be used sparingly and carefully. It is, however, the only way to do certain things. Okay. And that ARIA Live example that I mentioned is an example of a case where if you're doing anything that's dynamically updating the DOM, you have to use ARIA Live so that that'll be expressed to a screen reader.
Yeah.
Period. Now, the way you use it, you need to really be kind of careful about, because, for example, you could just decide, well, I'm just going to apply ARIA Live to my body element. I mean, that way, you know, I'm covered. Anything that updates is great. That could be really, really ugly, because that means potentially every dynamic update ends up reading the entire body of the page. So you also want those ARIA regions to be as small as possible.
Okay.
You can define another attribute that's called ARIA atomic, which is useful for indicating whether only changed nodes within the container should be updated. But even so, I mean, the performance hit you could potentially take by attaching ARIA Live to the body element would be not something you want to think about.
There are examples of it in use. When I was doing research and prep for this, I told a couple of people that I was just blown away by what I was seeing, and that this is actually nothing that new, that it's been in practice by some people for years. And something as simple as like tabbed navigation is completely different when ARIA meta tags or meta, I don't even know how you would, elements are added to it. I wouldn't say that somebody's got to completely redo from scratch something that already exists, but what I would say is understand who your end users are, and if you want to have the competitive edge, that's a business requirement and a reason to go back and start implementing certain things where it may be helpful. But it's like mobile. Everybody's like in a panic to redesign for mobile, and now all of a sudden we're talking about ARIA, and you just see people just, you know, shrinking away in fear.
Yeah.
So it definitely has a use case.
Yeah. There are two things that Kim said here that I definitely want to move on a little bit more with. One, I'm glad you mentioned tab panels. It's a great segue to the next topic I want to talk about. And the other one is the mention that you don't need to rebuild things completely to use ARIA. And that is absolutely true, because ARIA is a meta language. It's all built on attributes. So a lot of the time, you can actually get everything you need just by inserting those attributes into your existing code and creating those relationships. And it doesn't change anything about your CSS. It doesn't have to change anything about your CSS. It might not change anything about your JavaScript. I mean, just the day before yesterday, I submitted a patch to the WordPress plugin Easy Digital Downloads to fix an accessibility problem with their Add to Cart button, which had this very case of it was Ajax driven and didn't have ARIA Live. The patch consisted of nothing more than adding a couple of attributes. It had no impact on design, it had no impact on their JavaScript, it had no impact on CSS, and so it was a really easy patch to get committed. It's already been committed. And that's because you can add so much accessibility with these extremely, extremely simple changes, which is hugely valuable. Now I want to talk.
Where do you do that? I read somewhere you can add the elements of the attributes using shortcodes, and I'm thinking of WordPress now. Shortcodes and in the editor file.
Situations where you would need to add an ARIA attribute using the WordPress content editor, should be extremely rare. I mean, if you're writing code directly into the editor, that could come up. But realistically, you shouldn't be writing ARIA in. You just shouldn't be writing ARIA in the editor. You just really shouldn't.
Okay.
Obviously, there are an infinite number of different possible cases in the world. So yeah, I could imagine it could come up, but you shouldn't be. It should be, honestly, something that's being mostly provided from the tools, from the theme, from the plugins, and so that's where that should mostly be added.
Okay, good.
You know, if you're doing a bespoke site, obviously, you might want to use it in places, but it's not something that a content editor should never have to worry about ARIA. That should just not be their responsibility.
Okay.
So now I want to get back to that question you raised of tab panels, because what that gets to is an interesting concept in ARIA, which is the role attribute. And what a role attribute is for is defining what an element is. And that may seem kind of tautological in that it kind of defines itself, and that's somewhat true. For example, there is an ARIA role value for heading. So you can look at your H1 and you can say H1 role equals heading. But that is stupid because, yeah, it's an H1. It's already got the role of heading. That's automatic. It's implicit. But on the other hand, you also have structures like a tab panel. There's also a role for tab panel. There's roles for tabs. And those are actually really valuable because that's a structure that does not exist in HTML. It has no meaning directly in HTML. So if you use those roles, you can take a bunch of divs or list items and give them a whole new structure by defining their roles in another way. And that way, the user who's coming at it with a screen reader, instead of just seeing a bunch of links that it's unclear what they do, knows that the internal structure here is actually a set of tabs and panels. And that just gives them more information about how this site actually works and what their expectations should be while they go through this. It's a very helpful thing, but roles can be really dangerous. I've actually got a brief visual example to show here, so I'm just going to quickly share a screen. You have to let me know if it's shared. How's that?
Not yet.
All right. Nope. All right. Tells me I'm screen sharing, so I don't know.
Imagine a door.
Oh,
That's it. Yes.
Yay.
So let's just imagine a door. And this is a metaphor for using an HTML element. It's got door handles. It's got knockers. That one's got pretty impressive knockers. It's got hinges. Don't laugh, Kim. I didn't think of that before I wrote it.
That's the first thing I thought of when I saw that.
I didn't think of it when I wrote it, but I definitely thought of it as soon as I said it. All right, anyway, it's got all of these attributes because it's a door. But what if it doesn't actually have those features? What if it just looks like a door, but it doesn't actually open like a door? It just tells you to go somewhere else. This is what can happen if you use roles badly. So this example, using a button, is a good example of a real door. It's a button. You come to it, it tells you it's a button. You press it, it does what a button should do. Awesome. This, on the other hand, is just being called a button. So when you arrive at this, it's going to tell you it's a button. You know, if you're using a screen reader, you land on that, it'll say, button, submit. And you'll try and hit return or space, and nothing at all will happen because it's not a button. The thing about a role is that it's really just a queue. It's not actually going to add all of the characteristics and attributes of an element. What it's going to do is just inform the user that this particular element is acting like a button. You'd actually have to add all of those characteristics yourself. So there's a bunch of things you want to really avoid with roles. You really don't want them to be redundant. And you can see, there's my example, h1 role equals heading, ARIA level equals 1. It's totally redundant. Everything there is exactly what it is. You don't want to replace an element. P, role equals heading, ARIA level equals 1. That's also ludicrous. It's a paragraph. Just call it a paragraph. If you want a heading, use a heading. Or don't modify them. You can do h1 role equals heading and ARIA level equals 2. And that indicates that it's actually an h2. But don't do that, because all of these are elements that actually exist. And that's just kind of a general rule of using ARIA, is that they have all of these roles. And you can find in the documentation everything for role equals heading, but really you should avoid that as much as possible. But when you get to something like role equals tab panel, that's really valuable, because it's actually something that doesn't exist in HTML.
So when there's a contradiction between the two, between the tag and the role, does the screen reader support it anyways? I mean, which direction does the screen reader go? If you have a div that says role button, does the screen reader ignore the role because it knows it's a div, or does it say, oh, well, it must be a button, even though it's not a button?
With the example of role equals button, what it will do is it will announce to you that this is a button. So as far as that concerned, but it won't act as a button. If you want it to act as a button, you'll also have to write a bunch of JavaScript to give it all of the various behaviors that a button would have. So one of the reasons people want to use a div is because it's easier to style. You're like, well, great, you save some styling, but you have to add a bunch of JavaScript. I'm not sure you've won out in this scenario.
So the moral of the story is, if you're going to use ARIA, then just use HTML the way it's supposed to be used.
Pretty much. That's about 90% of it.
That's basically it. And really, this is so interesting, because I used to do a lot of accessible web design before ARIA existed, I think. I hope so, at least, God. And this is so interesting because back then my main thing was, okay, let's just write code the way it's supposed to be written.
Yep.
Let's avoid these overdone, JavaScript calls and whatnot. And I'm seeing with ARIA, even though ARIA kind of closes some holes, where traditional code can't operate, it still kind of falls back to that same kind of strategy, in that you want to use HTML the way it's intended to be used,
right,
and not get overly creative with your markup and your CSS styling and whatnot.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that's really very true. I mean, the thing about ARIA is that it provides you with some hooks that are incredibly valuable, like the ARIA Live and some of the ARIA relationships. And then there's this whole series of ARIA labeling tools, which are actually fabulous. But they also come with a whole lot of kind of superfluous contexts, like some of these roles that are just redefining existing elements. And in theory, those are there because it's like, well, if you're in an environment where you can't change the HTML, you can still change its structure by imposing these attributes. But honestly, I feel like that's a stupid theory. That's just over-engineering. And they're just saying, we're going to handle all of these edge cases just in case. Oh, great. I mean, I think, honestly, ARIA would be a better specification if it didn't have any of these redundant roles and just said, don't use role equals heading, use a heading.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't write the spec, so I don't know what the conversations were that went into that. Regardless,
ARIA part of the WCAG 2.0
No.
Requirement? No? Okay. So
ARIA
it's
is a
Section
completely...
508.
You want to get into the whole topic of specifications and requirements? Section 508 was written in 1990. Well, it was published in 1998. It was actually written in the early to mid 90s. ARIA really, really, really didn't exist at the time and is not addressed in any way whatsoever. On the other hand, Section 508 does address some great things like server-side image maps.
Yeah.
Not that anybody in their right mind would use one.
Yeah.
So Section 508 is basically a document. I tell people, ignore it always.
Absolutely.
I mean, unless you're actually a federal contractor.
Unless you're a federal contractor.
Right.
But even then, honestly, what you should be doing, even if you're a federal contractor, is building to the WCAG 2 specifications.
Yeah, definitely.
And then double checking to make sure you haven't broken any of the really weird ass shit that appears in Section 508.
But
it's not a useful document.
Yeah, well, let me just clarify a little bit, though, because I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. However, legally speaking, 508 applies to a lot of people that don't even know it applies to them.
Yes, it does.
And I'm not talking about, I mean, 508 is, it is what it is, but it does apply to anyone that receives federal dollars. So you could be a technical contractor, in the technical sense, or you could be just someone that receives grant money, someone that receives any type of federal money coming in to support their organization. It can also be directly or indirectly for a web project. So it's not, it's a little, gray area of who it applies to. And most people get away with not doing anything at all, honestly.
Right.
But legally, it's kind of a gray area,
Well, healthcare.gov, is an example.
Well, if it's .gov, then it's definitely.
But I bet it doesn't have ARIA.
Yeah. But the thing, ARIA is not part of Section 508.
Yeah.
Thing is, the guidelines do not stipulate technology. The guidelines stipulate experience.
Yeah.
The user experience should be accessible. Section 508 is partially flawed in that it does stipulate certain things about technology. And that's one of the reasons that it's actually extremely difficult to use. It's also in the process of being refreshed, and that, of course, has been postponed every single year now for over a decade. They're currently claiming that it'll be published this upcoming fall, but I don't believe it. But when it's updated, it's supposed to end up conforming to WCAG 2. And so in terms of planning for the future, it's actually much wiser to work on WCAG 2 rather than work towards Section 508 just to end up having a whole new, more challenging set of guidelines to work to later. Because really, Section 508 is, for the most part, an inferior subset of WCAG 2. And WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, for anybody who doesn't know that.
I always say WCAG. I didn't even hear your way of saying it until just now.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons I thought I should probably explain it.
Yeah.
But the thing is...
I have one question real quick about ARIA.
Yeah.
What percentage of the screen reader market supports ARIA?
All of it.
And all of it does? They all support it? Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
That isn't to say that they all support 100% of it. It's a large specification, and there are some things that are mixed. But they all support at least a fairly significant percentage of it.
Okay.
Okay, what about Joe? I got one question.
Yes.
I was just thinking, because we usually, people like me who are more into content writing, less towards the development part, they're more focused towards purchasing the WordPress themes as compared to hire somebody to do things for them, okay?
Yeah.
Because it's easy for us to get a theme from ThemeFrost, ThemeFuse,
Right.
whatever the companies are. So how can we then be able to put ARIA into things, because we don't have developers then, okay?
Right, of course.
We don't know either that the theme that we have got is now ARIA supported, or will ARIA language is going to slow down the speed of the web page, which that usually we test on Google speed test.
Okay, well, that I can definitely assure you that unless they're doing something incredibly stupid with ARIA, it is not going to have any significant impact in a speed test, period.
Because what I'm
it is not
right now,
it's just HTML attributes, so all it's adding to your page is a handful of characters. It doesn't get rendered by the browser, it doesn't get processed by the browser. It's basically just a bunch of stuff that sits there and is listened to by the accessibility API.
Okay, so it's not
it doesn't add anything to load.
Right.
Now,
Okay,
as far as your other question about how you... Yep, sorry.
This means if you're going to have a theme, if you purchase a theme from ThemeFrost, we don't know anything about ARIA, right? All we need to do is just put it over there. Are there any plugins that you guys are working that we just simply embed or install those plugins that make our theme more of an ARIA supported rather than we have to work on it?
That's a hard question. Now, I will say that a lot of themes are getting better and better in terms of accessibility. And you shouldn't really be looking so much at whether or not it's quote-unquote ARIA supported as whether it has support for accessibility. ARIA is one method of adding accessibility, but there are a lot of other facets that don't have anything to do with ARIA. And a website can be totally accessible without even using ARIA, assuming it's not making use of any dynamic JavaScript or complex features like that. That said, ARIA is beneficial. Now, my plugin WP Accessibility does do a very small amount to add ARIA. One of the things it is able to do is impose what's called ARIA landmark roles on a document. And landmark roles are a way of creating a navigable structure within a document so that a user with a screen reader can jump, say, from the header to the main navigation, to the body, to the sidebar, to the footer, without needing to actually painstakingly line by line go through every piece of content. They can just, pull up a list of landmark regions and jump to the sidebar because they're like, I know I need to get to the sidebar. And that's something it can do. I know that ThemeForest has been working on improving their accessibility support for themes in their internal review process. I personally trained the guy who's in charge of the ThemeForest's theme directory on assessing themes for accessibility, so I know that that's something that they are aware of. I haven't looked at their directory to see if there's a particularly good way of finding those. I know in the WordPress.org theme repository, we do have an accessibility ready tag so that you can limit to just viewing themes that have been audited and reviewed for accessibility. There are about 100 of those. Nice. So part of it is about looking at what options there are to filter themes by, so you can kind of say, what is available here that might actually provide some accessibility. Because without a certain amount of expert knowledge, I mean, it's going to be really hard to look at a theme and just know it's accessible. And that's actually where, like, my other plugin, Access Monitor, can be very valuable in that it can assess a page. You can install it, set it up, run a test of the home page of the theme, and it'll dump you out a set of errors if they're there. It's not going to catch everything because a lot of accessibility is very subjective. It requires a human interaction to really check and make sure what's going on. But it will catch a lot of the more objective things like missing labels or a div that appears to be acting as a button. So it's worth looking at. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. What I'm doing right now while I'm talking, having a conversation with you, I am onto both the plugins. I'm working on that also. Because
Excellent.
I want to make, because it's more like, I'm not a core developer, but I work with a lot of development people because I've been recruiting them up. So I'm just trying to run this thing because this is very, very new to me. This is the first time I'm hearing such part of in our lives here in this region. So it's going to be a tough job for us also, because
absolutely
what you're talking about is something very new. Okay.
It is. I understand that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But I got one question which is coming up into my mind a lot. How can we know such and such codes are for the ARIA and these codes are not for the ARIA? Because it's all matter of language. It's all matter of coding, right?
Right.
Get that PDF document that I made.
I do have.
Because I had the same question.
I've already opened that. I've already opened 4 windows for that. I've already opened his WordPress TV channel. Is list of presentations that he has done previous. I've already opened that also. So I could say, I guess for people like us or for the new people, the beginners, I guess you need to come up again for another session to give us and tell us, okay, what you guys did, where the hell you were stuck.
Right.
It's for me, it's a confusing thing right now. I'm sorry about
it. Is. I think that's fair.
But it's very confusing for me because if I'm having a button which says click here, so fine, what ARIA has to do with that? So it's a click button, that's it.
Right. Well, and it depends on what the button does as to whether or not ARIA has any impact.
Yeah, that's because what I'm looking at a couple of forums right now. They've given three to four different options here. Few of them have given like ARIA is more like a question mark. It gives out 3 phases. What does button do? What is the relationship of the button? Where does it stands for? Where does it goes? So it is a hell of a learning right now. My apologies.
Yes.
I'm pretty confused right now. I'm pretty confused right now because I've been doing this work also, right? But again, one thing comes up when people are shifting from this browsing stuff. For every website, there is an app also upcoming. Okay, if you pick up Mashable, Mashable has a website, but it has an app also. Okay.
Right.
So what is going to be ARIA for the app? Because I think it has nearly no HTML coming up over there because it's picking up a few things from the web servers and throwing it to the app. So,
well, apps are really a very separate experience, and it really depends on how they're written. But an app is going to be directly interfacing with the operating system of the mobile device that it's on. And so that's a completely separate accessibility API, and ARIA is only about interactions between a website and a browser. So it's only in that environment. Some ARIA concepts translate into app development, but it's really a very separate area, if that answers your question there.
Is it safe to say that ARIA is still front end?
Oh, absolutely.
Emphasis.
ARIA is 100% front end.
Okay, it's not like something that the software developers and programmers need to the back end side.
Okay, well, I won't say that. I think there's a difficult question there of what is the front end. If you mean front end in terms of like the public experience of a website, then no. But if you mean front end in any user interface at all, then yeah, it's part of all it should be part of all web-based user interfaces.
Say you are a company that develops tools, a software tool or an SEO tool company. Should they be watching this webinar? Is there something in here for them as developers?
If you develop anything for the web, you should be learning and trying to understand how to use ARIA. And you should be taking, the most important thing you should take away from this is going to be that ARIA live regions are critical for any kind of DOM changing JavaScript events, and B, only use ARIA if there's no other HTML solution. Because one of the worst things you can do is just fill your page up with a ton of ARIA attributes and end up with just this confusing gobbledygook. Because ARIA can be used to tell complete lies to a screen reader.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can add a whole lot of information via ARIA, which gives somebody the impression that something is going to work in a particular way, but not actually convey any real usability. The fact is, if your application works without JavaScript, mostly it'll be fine without ARIA. That said, if you're actually running the JavaScript, you will probably need the ARIA too. It's not uncommon to actually insert ARIA attributes using JavaScript.
Well, let me ask you that.
The thing is, there are a lot of complex cases.
So if you're injecting ARIA using JavaScript, I mean, does the screen reader pick that up? I mean, if it's
yes,
not
it does.
If it's not part of the DOM,
it is part of the DOM, though. When you inject something using JavaScript, it is part of the DOM, because the DOM that the screen reader is using is what's been done after all JavaScript is processed.
Oh, really?
And that's actually why these dynamic JavaScript events are so hard to pick up, is because they're a second layer of JavaScript that executes after the DOM is loaded.
I was always under the assumption that screen readers did not read JavaScript on initial page load.
And that is completely wrong.
That's a myth.
Yep, it is a myth.
It
used to be true. Yeah.
It used to be true. Okay.
It used to be true. Yes.
See this is like I mentioned earlier. I haven't done accessible web design in forever.
Right.
So I'm glad to hear that the screen readers have evolved.
Yep.
But yeah, that's cool then. So you can so conceivably, let me ask you this, Joe. This is a real mind bender for you. Let's say we use an ARIA live attribute for a DOM, and through the use of Ajax, we inject more ARIA tags inside that Ajax DOM. Does the screen reader pick that up? I guess it would.
Yeah, it would. Yep.
Be like ARIA in section.
I mean, I'm not sure what would happen if you inserted an ARIA live container inside an ARIA live container. That could get odd.
It's called.
But
yeah, that's a recursive something. You know.
Yeah, indeed. But you know, one of the things about the fact that screen readers are reading the DOM with JavaScript having been processed is that if you're using any kind of automated tool, it's really critical that that tool is testing the full DOM and not just, say, the browser source. And a lot of automated tools only test the browser source. And that's one of the things, Tenon.io that I mentioned earlier that works with my plugin Access Monitor is one that tests the DOM. It's using a Phantom.js driven headless browser to actually pick up your website and do that test. So it's making sure that everything gets rendered, which if it's not, it can be, who knows, it doesn't really matter what the results you get are if there's JavaScript that's, say, fixing them. My plugin
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
My plugin WP Accessibility, most of the way that actually works is by injecting JavaScript into the page, or using JavaScript to inject attributes into the page. So that's most of what it does.
You know, I just had this thought. You know, ARIA could potentially be used to aid crawlers or scrapers. I guess people don't like to call them scrapers. But crawlers.
Depends on what they're doing.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, but automated crawlers, you know.
Right.
And this could be in the sense of a search engine crawler or any type of data harvesting tool. I know that we use crawlers a lot with SEO to to crawl sites and whatnot. In theory, I mean, I guess this could be a way to crawl through JavaScript. If you could design your crawler to respond to ARIA live elements, you could crawl through JavaScript that way. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, if you designed your crawler to find a page and activate a button and then find the changes in the ARIA live region, that would.
Yeah, because,
I don't see any reason that wouldn't work.
Because a lot of times when you're developing a crawler or scraping a site, the hardest part is understanding which elements of the DOM are actually driven with Ajax or driven with JavaScript. So
right, and anything that's marked as ARIA live is pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be driven that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, that would absolutely be a possibility.
Yeah,
definitely.
Anton, where are we with time?
Oh, well, I guess we will 1 hour 10, 11 minutes, so basically 1 hour on the air. If you do have more questions, Kim, yeah.
Yeah, go to town. I mean,
I think we got to all mine. Yeah, we got to all my questions.
Okay, I'll check if we do have questions here, and I don't think we do. Okay, the usual question I ask, because people sometimes are a bit slow, and some people that watching the recordings, if they want to ask you questions, Joe mostly, how can they do it? What's the best way to get you?
Best way to reach me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Generally, Twitter is a good way to reach me. If you have any real, serious questions, I'll probably want to answer them through my website contact form, which is at joedolson.com/contact.
It's on our web page, and your
Great.
Twitter handle as well. I think if it's not a Twitter handle, I'll put it there. So if you wanna ask Joe something about ARIA or some more detailed, or you're just watching the recordings, you can use his Twitter to reach him, or he contact form, and it's all there. Kim, what about you?
I'm good. I mean, if anybody has any questions for me, it's creativevisionwebconsulting.com. But I would probably end up throwing it all back to Joe anyway. I had a thought in my head and I just lost what it was. Oh, one of the things that I wanted to do is to try to get the video version of this into an accessible version, which I might talk to Joe about, later, because to my surprise, there's actually ways of doing that outside of YouTube. And the second thing was if there's a demand for a part 2, because there's a lot of information in here. So if anybody's watching now or later and they have ideas for talking to Joe again, we would love to be able to respond to that, need, because I think it's a huge topic.
It is a huge topic.
It's a big topic, and it's very new, as Rizwan mentioned, very new, at least for us, very new topic. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people that just have no idea what's all about. But guys, we need your feedback. If you want to continue, go deeper or wider, whatever, just let us know. Anything else? No? Joe?
I'm good. From my side, I'm going to have questions once I get to know what ARIA is.
It seems fair.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, we will
because
have here for
if I'm going to ask something that even does not make sense to me, because what I'm looking and what I'm seeing on the text window here is it's a very different world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different world. It's easy for things to say, because if we have to put ARIA on or implement ARIA on our web pages, this means we need to train our the UI and the UX developers regarding that also, because they need to be educated, because they're the core person who will be working or who is going to work on those such elements. Not only the part of the core PHP developers or the CSS, but it has to be our accessible people who are doing the graphic work, placing the buttons, doing the HTML back part and everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good, but it's pretty confusing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay,
I don't
So
deny
more
it.
like I'd be calling, I'd be sending a message to Kim to have a relaxation time for this, because this went pretty.
We'll have to send you long
pretty
distance
rough one.
Reiki.
Yeah, you need to do that.
Okay, thank you,
So
thank you,
thank you very
Joe,
much.
for very yeah, thank you, and we have more. Thank you, down there, down to audience. Thank you, Joe, for very interesting, absolutely new for me subject. Thank you, Kim. You brought it, and thank you, Joe, for coming. Thank you, Rizwan, for coming. Musa had to go, but thank you, Musa, for coming as well. Thank you, everybody, and everyone who watched us tonight or it's morning. It depends where you are. Thank you very much. We will have more good stuff. Just watch us. And everyone who watched us, have a nice day. It's morning and night. And we'll see you again. See you again Thursday actually. And goodbye.